My name's Adam Bacher. I'm a freelance photographer and a photojournalist, and I've had a great honor to get involved in doing some work in Rwanda in the last couple years. Nothing that was ever a big passion of mine beforehand. Fate just kind of brought me there, and now I am so dedicated to continuing my work there and as David told us, telling the stories of the Rwandan people, because there are amazing stories of hope and peace, as well as I will start off telling you some stories about the genocide. And it's important to know about what went on and what happened, and I'm going to show you some images that are pretty hard to look at, but I'll ask you to bear with me, and I promise I won't be a bummer for my whole speech, just maybe the first 10 or 15 minutes of it. So Rwanda is just this dinky little country right here in sub-Saharan Africa, just to give you an idea. Capital is Kigali. This whole country is about the same size as Maryland. The streets are very well paved. From Kigali, you can get to really any of the borders within about 3 hours. Rwanda is one of the things that's a little different than some of the other African countries is Rwanda has been a country that's unified under one language. It has 3 ethnic groups. There's a majority Hutu group that's about 80%. There's a Tutsi group minority that's about 20%. And there's a small Twa group that's literally 1 or 2%. So I know it doesn't quite add up, but it's close. And for those of you who know or don't know, in 1994, 15 years ago, there was a just horrific genocide. There were 1 million people that were killed in the course of 3 months. And I want to talk a little bit about the genocide and some background on it, and then talk about what's going on now, because in 15 years, there are amazing stories of how peace can really happen and how peace can be built. And I think they're examples for the world, because there's so much bad going on. And here's this country that in 15 years has really dragged itself up out of just humanity's worst and is here to show that we can overcome the bad things that have happened. Rwanda was colonized like the rest of Africa, originally by Germany. After World War I, Germany lost the war. Their colonial assets were divided up. Belgium was given Rwanda. The Belgians came in and they saw this opportunity with this minority ethnic group, the Tutsis, to set them up as sort of their administrators. And the Tutsis, the Hutus, you know, to tell them apart, the Tutsis are a little more Anglo-looking. Their noses were a little thinner. Their necks were a little thinner. They were appealed to the European colonizers. That was part of what sort of prompted them to pick the Tutsis to administer the country. The lines between the ethnic groups have always been blurred. They're, to some extent, if you were a Tutsi, if you owned more than 5 head of cattle, you know, the Hutus were more of the farmers, the Tutsis were more of the ones who grazed the animals. So the Belgians came in. They set this up. They issued identity cards to everyone. So you were placed with your identity, and they ruled the country. Not terribly brutal rule, but still there was an oppressed majority. 1959 comes around. Rwanda gains its independence. The Hutus take power, and there begins a series of killings back and forth. Within the next 2-3 years, almost 1 million Tutsis flee the country, and the Hutus are now set up as the rulers of the country. And again, they're not ruling horribly oppressively, but they're definitely, you know, the Hutus are the favored class. There's over 1 million Rwandan refugees in Uganda, in Congo, and Tanzania. In the 80s, they start, actually, it goes back further than that, but in the 80s, they very seriously start pressuring the government to allow them to return home. They're living in these other countries as second-class citizens. They're not allowed to participate in education. They're not allowed to participate in whatever the social structure, the social welfare structure of the other countries. They have to sort of see if they can pass themselves off as Ugandans to be able to go to school, and pass themselves off as Tanzanians to go to school. And they're starting to say, we want to come back. And the Rwandan government is saying, no, there's no room for you. So a small rebel force is put together to pressure the government. And between 90 and 94, they're able to force the government into a power sharing agreement, and they're making preparations in 94 to come back and be integrated into the government. While this is going on, we know for certain, at least by 1991, there's a small militant faction of the government that doesn't want the Tutsis to come back, and they literally start planning the genocide. And they start building militias. They start importing machetes and clubs and a small amount of guns, but most of the killing was actually done hand-to-hand. And they're creating death lists. In 1993, they start a hate radio station, and they are indoctrinating fear into the population. They're telling the Hutu majority that, and when I say that, let me back up for a second, this is a very, very poor country. It's subsistence farmers. There's very little education. There isn't much mass media. There's a paper, but very few can read. Radio is the main source of getting information. And so there's this propaganda campaign that gets started, and they're saying the Tutsi rebels are coming, and they want to take your land, and they want to take over, and they want to take control, and we need to resist them. And there's this whole process of dehumanization going on. There are cockroaches, there's snakes. You can't trust a snake. If you turn your back, they'll bite you. They're preparing the population for genocide. And in 1994, peace accords are signed. The president of Rwanda is out of the country. He's flying back home. He's approaching Kigali, the capital, in his airplane. It's April 4th or 5th, and the plane gets shot down. And out on the radio, you hear, "This is it. The Tutsis are coming for you. Take up arms now. We have to kill them." This was a population that was mobilized by fear, and the population was very much brought into and participated in the killing, and it was through the fear mostly that brought them into the killing. So that's sort of the background of how it happened. You know, people ask, and I have to admit that the more I read, the more questions I have about everything that's gone on, but the basic fear and how it was used to mobilize the people seems to be pretty consistent. This is Kigali. Rwanda is the country of 10,000 hills, and it literally is. You're going from hill to hill. This is the capital. There's actually a downtown area that's built up. You go out a little deeper into the capital, and you see slum areas like this. This is sort of a typical road. People are living in homes that have mud floors. They're one room. Everybody sleeps together in the little space that they have. They're farming. They're not poor where they're starving. You don't really see people starving, but you see hungry people. They're fortunate that they have consistent rains and are able to farm through. It's a pretty common sight in the city or elsewhere because there's cars in the city, but for the most part, your feet are your main mode of transportation. I want to start out by showing you some scenes of the genocide. One of the things they did in Rwanda after the genocide is they built a number of memorials, some of which are very graphic. They have racks of bones, and they have preserved bodies laid out, and I think it's really important. I've never showed this in public. They're really intense, but I think it's important to see this. We see death all the time on TV as means of our entertainment, and yet we see very little of what really goes on. I mean, we're not even allowed to see coffins of our Iraqi soldiers come back from the war, let alone the scenes. And I think it's important to see reality because that's what keeps us knowing how bad it really is. In the beginning of the genocide, the first thing they did, the very first day, is they put out lists and they killed all of the moderate Hutus, all of the teachers, anyone who could possibly lend any dissent and any credibility to counter what the government was doing. They very cleverly, they rounded up 9 Belgian peacekeepers, they brought them to an army barracks, and they killed them. And the message was, and it worked, was to the West, get out of here. And that's exactly what happened. The West came and they evacuated all of their peoples. There was a UN peacekeeping force that was brought down to a bare minimum, and they were told not to engage. So this is a memorial to the Belgians. I'm going to skip some of these. This is where they were brought. They were brought to this army barracks, and you can see these are all bullet holes where they were shooting at them. They were then, 8 of the 9 were brought inside, and in this corner they were lined up and gunned down. And that was the end of them, and it was the beginning of the genocide for the bulk of the population, and it scared everybody else off, and they were allowed to kind of do their thing. A lot of people talk about, well, and why didn't the world get involved? And that's, I think, is on the conscience of Clinton, and it's on the conscience of the UN. There were factors involved. I don't excuse what they did. They should have gone in. This could have been stopped so easily. There were other things going on. Somalia had just happened, where we had a peacekeeping force in Somalia, and there was an ambush, and the U.S. lost a number of soldiers. There was some other failed peacekeeping missions that the UN had been involved in. And when I think about how did the genocide happen, it's almost this concept of like a perfect storm, like everything lined up. The propaganda and the planning had gone out. Things had gone on globally that I think made the West hesitant to get involved. Doesn't mean they should have, because they should have. There's no question. The other thing is, Rwanda, there's no oil, there's no resources. What do we really care? And that's pretty sad. So part of the background. This is the memorial. Each of these stones represents one of the soldiers that was killed. One of the strategies when the genocide first started was to round people up into areas where they could just kill a lot of people at once. And so they were told, well, go to the churches, you'll be safe there. And there's definitely the sense, well, who would come in and kill me in the church? This is out in the sort of central western part of the country. This is a school that was being built right here with dormitories in back. And people in this area were said, go to the school at Marumbai, you'll be safe there. 40 to 50,000 Tutsis as well as moderate Hutus gathered there, and the next day the power was cut, the water was cut, and they held out for 2 weeks until finally fortified militia came in and slaughtered all of them. There were 4 to 5 survivors. If you go here, this is one of the gentlemen who's a survivor. When you go to the genocide memorials, most of the times there are survivors of the massacres at those memorials that will take you around. And you can see he was shot and left for dead. He woke up 2 days later under a pile of bodies in a pool of blood. And that night he made his way out. I talked to him fairly extensively. My first trip to Rwanda was in October 2007. I went back again this year for the month of January, and I'll be going back again in November. And it was really interesting, and he's a great example because this guy, when I saw him in October, he just looked like death worn over. I mean, he was so, just like a crypt keeper, just empty and depressed and sad. And he walked us around, and he showed us the rooms where what happened was after the slaughter, there was so much disease going on. They spread lime on the bodies to keep the disease down, and then they were buried in a mass grave. And after the genocide was over, the genocide lasted for about 3 months. It ended when the Tutsi army that was supposed to be peacefully integrated into Rwanda, they were the ones who marched in from Uganda and slowly stopped the killing. When they got to this area, they dug up the bodies for proper burial, and they decided they wanted to leave some on display to remind the world and remind themselves of what happened. There are a lot of people. One of the last kind of stages of genocide is denial. It wasn't genocide. There really weren't that many people that got killed. It was just a civil war. And talking with Emmanuel, one of the things he asked me, he said, please tell my story. Tell the people what happened here. And I'm going to show you. And so what they did is the schools here, these were going to be dormitories. Now they house bodies. I went back in October. I went back in January this year, and I brought a photo for him, and I was really looking forward to being able to talk to him, Emmanuel again. And this smiling, happy man came running up to my car when we drove up, and it was just amazing. It was like he came back from the dead, and I talked to him. I said, you know, when I saw you last, I said, you were such a different person. How did this transformation take place? And he said, you know, I started talking to people. I started talking to other survivors. I started talking to some of the perpetrators, because at this point in Rwanda, most of the people that were involved in committing the genocide, except for the organizers, they're back out of prisons. They're living side by side with the people that they were killing. And they have to live together. And it's amazing. It's amazing that they're not still killing each other. I think it just astounds me. Every time I just think about it, they don't like each other. There's fear, you know, but they're not there. I don't think anyone has a desire to go back to what happened. And I think that's part of, I think the intensity of the killing is part of what has kept them from going into cycles of retribution. So, one of the programs that the government put in place is called TIG, T-I-G, and it's a French word that means community service, acts of community works, travail. I'm not even going to give that. Yes, works of the general interest. Is that, if I recall? So I spent a day with these people in January, and this is one of the prisons. The people that have been willing to, the perpetrators that have been willing to come forward and say, and accept responsibility for what they did, one of the options after that is they can finish their prison terms doing community service as opposed to living in the prisons. And these are prisoners that are out on work parties and go back to the prisons. The people involved in the community service, they're living in tented cities. They've already served time in prison, and now they're giving back. And the way they're giving back is they're helping build homes for survivors. Rwanda, Africa, poor part of the poorer areas of the world. I think there's a lot. Also, very similar things going on. Roads aren't built with earth-moving machines. Roads are dug out with picks and wheelbarrows and shovels. They're building a road that goes off to a brick factory. They're mining the earth, sifting the dirt for the fine dirt, making it in piles, and then in some areas they have machines that they load them up and it's hydraulically compressed, and there are these big bricks come out, and these bricks will then become bricks of homes for survivors. Homes, when you make a home in Rwanda, the first thing you do is you dig the toilet, the pit for the toilet. Most people have no electricity, they have no running water. So building a home begins with the bathroom. And when the pit gets deep, they fill up a shovel, they fill up the pail, and they lift it out. And you can see this is kind of the homes in different stages of construction. Even the tiles on the roofs are being built by the prisoners, which I'll show you in just a couple minutes here. This is we saw where they made some of the bricks. This is where they make more bricks and tiles. It's a riverbed. They're mining clay here. They bring the clay in these big, piles, and then first they're stepping on it, and it's sort of like making grapes, and then they're beating it with clubs, and then they're fashioning it into tiles. So it's really, they're involving the people who participated in the genocide to give back, and they're trying to do what they can because they have to reintegrate the people. They can't hold them all in jail. There's controversy on both sides. There's survivor groups that say, these people are getting off too lightly. It's not fair. There's other groups that are saying, groups and people that are saying, well, we didn't, we had to participate because if we didn't participate, they would have killed us. And there's a little bit of truth to that, but there's not a lot. I think they've reached a good medium in terms of how they're trying to reconcile, and that's what a lot of it is about. You have to find a way to reconcile. I don't know that you can always be able to forgive, and from what I read, forgiveness is hard, but you have to still find a way to work together and live together. And this is one of the ways that the government is aiding the country and the population to do so. It was interesting. I was showing these to my daughter when I came home, and she's like, "Dad, weren't you scared, these prisoners?" And I really, and it's, again, I don't speak the language, and I'm talking to people through interpreters, but I really have felt that these people wanted to make amends to some extent. They didn't want to completely admit their complicity and all the things they did, but they wanted to get back to their lives, and they wanted to be able to be accepted back into the community. So these are the ovens where they load all the tiles, and then they fire up on the bottom, and this is the top. So he's taking me up here to show me where the tiles are, because on the bottom they build a fire and harden the tiles, and then they go out and they become the roofs of the housing for the survivors. After I was out in the field, we went back, and when I say when I travel in Rwanda, I've gotten into the position where I have a lot of connections, and so I went out with some government officials that took me to tour these areas and show me the different programs that are going on. So after we were sort of out in the field, we went back to have lunch, and I said, can I do some photos in the tents? I thought they were going to be empty tents, because I saw all the people working. Well, I didn't know they work in shifts. They go out, they work 3 days on and 3 days off, so we walk in the first tent. It was shocking to me. I wasn't expecting to see these people, and they come and they want to touch you and they want to talk to you, and at the same time, in the back of my mind, you're thinking, well, these people were killing people 15 years ago, and I found that I had to make some peace with that myself, because, you can't be afraid, and you can't let fear drive you, and so it just gave me something to reflect upon, I suppose. And even though we're seeing prisoners now, one of the things that I think comes through, and you'll see it throughout the photographs is there really is a spirit and a genuineness and a longing to build themselves up, to get past the genocide. There's a genuine connection that people have with each other. I think we have so many layers of superficiality in our modern societies that when you go back and you go into, and I experienced this in Kenya also and in some other places, that people are living on the edge, but yet their spirit really shines through. One assignment I did while I was there, a self-assignment, is I did spend a day sunrise to sunset with 2 Rwandan children and followed them around. And this whole series, I think, gives a great feel for how these people live, and to help understand, what is it about. And it's one of the things we don't realize in our country, I believe anyhow, because I know my kids are like clueless and they're teenagers, but a third of the world lives in pretty severe poverty. We have it pretty well here, and we have it really well here. Even the people who are on the bottom of our culture we have so much. We know that when you walk into a room, there's a switch and lights will go on, and you know that you can go find a place where you can go to the bathroom and push a lever and your waste disappears. You know that you can go fill your water bottle up somewhere and it'll be clean water and you can drink it. You don't have to worry about getting sick. A third of the world doesn't have any of that. And I think it's important to just remember how, the inhabitants of our planet live. I'm going to go back these two. This is Sammy's the little boy and Nadia's the little girl. You see all the kids, they have shaved heads, and it's strictly hygiene. They don't have access to clean themselves well. You keep your head shaved, you're not going to get lice, you're able to keep yourself clean. They're the 2nd and 4th graders. So the educational system up until this year that was government funded is primary 1 through 6. They've just expanded it to primary 9. There's a lot of kids that can't even take advantage of the education because it's too far to walk, or they have to be home helping with the crops, or they have to be home helping with sick relatives or parents, or they're just taking care of themselves because they have no parents. This is where they live. This home is actually divided in half. They live on the right side, and there's another family living on the left side. You walk in, and it's a room maybe 12 feet by 14 feet. It's a dirt floor. It's got a curtain down the middle, and on one half is where they eat, and basically just where they eat. And on the other half, there's mattresses pushed together, and everybody sleeps together. At night, they have chickens. I showed this to a Rwandan government official. I was showing some of these to, and she's like, "Oh wow, they have chickens. These people are rich." To me, I never would even have known that. So they're not even at at the lowest levels. This is the family that lives on the other side of the house. A woman and her 4 kids, 2, 3, 4 kids, yeah. She's got a little plot that she's growing some food in. This is the bathroom. Just a hole in the ground between the hedges. I love chickens. They're just great. But so at night, they've got 6 chickens. The chickens come in the house and sleep with them because that's the way they keep them from being stolen. This is the kitchen. 9-year-old boy, he's the chef, and the chef, he boils the water, but he lights the fire. The kids, they have to take care of themselves. They have to be part of survival for the whole family unit. This is the shower in the bathtub. You fill up a bucket with some water and you take a sponge bath, and that's how you clean yourself. This boy is actually their uncle. He's living with them. And this is half of the house. This is where they're eating. The day I was there, they had breakfast, completely out of the ordinary. Usually they just have 1 meal a day. Every now and then they don't have a meal. This is the other side of the house. This is where they sleep. 1 mattress, 2 mattresses, and 4 people sleep there. These are all of their belongings. There's a little shelf behind me that has a few more things, but that's it. Walk to school with them. The gentleman in the back is my translator who spent the day with me. You can tell the girls from the boys. The girls are wearing blue and the boys are wearing brown. It took me half a day to figure that out. It's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Because when you look at their faces, it's very hard to see. Here's the school. One of the things about being a fair-skinned person, as soon as you're out of the core of the city, they've never seen someone with light skin before. And they crowd around you. They want to touch you. It's as if, you walked outside after this presentation and there's a giraffe walking outside. It's just a natural curiosity. It's really quite sweet. They have a term for light-skinned people. It's Mzungu. And every time I've been anywhere out of the city, you will hear it, Mzungu, Mzungu. And you look, you're a hillside that looks bare, and all of a sudden all these people appear and they come around you. And it's interesting, and it's actually very, they're trying to get people not to call that out because there is a little bit of a racial slur to it. But to me, I have a lot of understanding for that. And the kids they're just great. And everywhere you go, you see this. The kids they're friendly, they're open, they're smiling, and they get along. You go into the classrooms. There's 70 kids in an average classroom. And I've probably been to 7 or 8 schools in my 2 trips. I've never seen anyone fighting. I've never seen kids screaming. I've never seen in a school a child crying. They know it's a privilege to go to school. They know it's their chance to get out of poverty, and they are there and they are paying attention, and they're trying to soak up everything they possibly can. I saw this, here, the naive American, and I said to my translator, I said, oh, what did those kids do to get into trouble? They've got to clean the school. And he's like, what are you talking about? This is an honor. This is not a punishment. You get to clean the school. You get to be the one who cleans the blackboards or sweep the classrooms out or sweep out the walkways. That's because they're doing well. The kids all line up before class. They do a little, similar to our Pledge of Allegiance, they sing a national anthem, and then they go running off. I just thought this was kind of cool because they're beginning to integrate English as their second language. Prior to the genocide, French was their second language. France was complicit in a lot of things that went on in the genocide, and there's bad feelings between the two countries, and they're now focusing on teaching English to the population. There's one Rwandan TV station in the morning. They show movies. I watched what's the movie where the animals escape from the zoo and they go off to Madagascar? It's on one morning. And just typical scenes. I mean, the teaching, I think, is somewhat universal, and there's the whole thing that's going on right now is there are no minorities. We're all Rwandans. That's what the government is pushing. There's some very strong anti-genocide laws where you're not even allowed to talk about it, and you're not allowed to talk about the different groups. And there's a lot of controversy because the laws have been used to persecute people that probably shouldn't have been. Not probably, that shouldn't have been. But I think and the government's being criticized that they're too authoritarian. They're democratically elected, but out of only one party. Government is fairly integrated. There are a lot of Hutus in the government. And some of those Hutus were military people that were participating in the genocide and did their jail time, and now they're out and they're participating in the government. Rwanda also has, of all the countries in the world, the highest proportion of women in the government. It's like 54%. I just love this. It's like such a school kid. Oh, it's great. For them to go to school are rules that they have to abide by. The kids have to have a uniform, and they have to provide their own books and pencils, but there's plenty of kids that don't have books. You do have to have a uniform to go to participate in school. Other than that, you know, it is pretty accessible if you can afford to not have to be at home and taking care of things. One of the things that was just so great is you see people walking arm in arm all the time and holding hands, you know, and you see it over here. Just the level of camaraderie that I saw in the country, and a lot of what I think the message that I want to get across is these people, they're just like us. You know, they want to have a meal, they want to have a warm or a protected shelter to go home to sleep in. You know, they want to be able to raise their children in peace. They want to be able to grow up without having to worry about any kind of violence. I think that's something that's universal, and it's really easy to forget. And the same is true with the people in Iraq. The same is true with the people, you know, in Iran or Israel or wherever, the Palestinians. I mean, it's so easy to think about, oh, all this violence is going on, and to forget that you know, the human needs are the same, and the love that we have is the same. We all love our children, and we all want to have, you know, things that are good for us. And it's really easy to get into the us versus them and to say, oh, well, they're all bad. And I mean, it's how our country was led into the war in Iraq. You know, what 80% of the people supported the war because for a year and a half, there was Bush and Cheney on the TV saying, you know, they hate freedom, they hate us, they're evildoers. It's all part of that whole idea of dehumanizing and categorizing, and it makes it easy to draw the population to support violent actions. We have to remember, there's bad in the world, but not all peoples are bad, and you can't group peoples as being bad. It's wrong, and it's a tool that the people in power use to get support to have their own aims met. Because I was there with them, they actually school stops at lunchtime, kids go home and eat if there's food to eat. Sam and Nadia stayed home for the second half of school so they could do sort of their typical chores around the house, so I could see that. First thing we did after the lunch break is we went and you walked to get water. These kids are really fortunate. Water was an easy 15-minute walk. Some people walk 2-3 hours. Right now, there's a campaign that the government is undertaking where they want to have clean water accessible within 2 kilometers for everyone. And they're trying to get it piped in to different places. But typically you go and you fill up. The kids, they call these jerry cans. The kids take these small cans. The larger ones are 20 liters and they're about 50 pounds. And you'll see old people walking with these huge cans under their arms. And you know, this guy filled up, and we were watching him as he was filling up, and I was having this discussion with my interpreter. I'm like, how's he going to get all that on his bicycle? But they know how to do it, so. And then fortunately for them, it was a short walk home. We got home, they left the water. The next thing they needed to do was they needed to go and gather wood. That's their source of cooking power. Rwanda's been mostly deforested. When you drive around the country, there's the land, you see all these beautiful terraced lands. It's farmed almost as much as they could farm it. They do not allow any tree cutting. Some people, if they have enough money, you can buy chunks of coal that you can burn in their little burners. A lot of people still have to gather wood. They had an area of land that they were allowed to gather alongside the road. We walked almost an hour to get there. And we started gathering wood, they started gathering wood, and I did what I needed to do photo-wise, and I put my camera down so I could help, and I grabbed a stick. I camp a lot and can do this stuff, right? I grabbed it, and the sticks that they were gathering from were literally covered with these little small thorns. I had cuts in my mouth, and I didn't even think of it. And here the kids are just breaking them up, and I tried to help on that, and it's just, their hands are calloused. It's part of how you adapt to whatever your living circumstances are. They weren't smiling for me. The kids were joking around with each other, and I was kind of off to the side, and it was just really sweet to see how they interact. They get everything gathered, they tie it all together, and then it goes on their heads. And it's amazing. He's 8 years old. He's got this, and I lifted his pile. It had to have weighed 40 pounds, 30, 40 pounds. He had to do it. He had to hold on. She never held on. And then we walked home. We took one break, I think. When you're out anywhere you go, you see the prisoners that are also, they're doing their forced work, and then they're going back to the prison. They're all in pink, so they stand out. Pink is also chosen because it's demasculating. It's part of the punishment, that you're wearing something that's humiliating to you. But you see them across the countryside. And they're not like prisoners out with 10 soldiers that are guarding them. There may be one soldier. They don't flee. They really don't have any place to go. You don't read about it. There's an English language newspaper, and I read online a few times a week, try to keep up on what's going on there. And I talk to people in countries like, why aren't you guarding them? Aren't you concerned? And it just isn't a concern. They know what will happen to them if they flee. And the country's small, and it's administered very well, so people aren't going to be able to just disappear into the landscape. They're going to be caught. So anyhow, we walked home with the wood. And then after that, they were feeding the chickens. It's my favorite part. And then there's this little boy here, this little guy, and he was just learning how to walk. And I saw him walking with one of the water cans. And next thing we know, and you'll see it, chickens taking toddler for a walk is what I call this. It's just great. Another program that they have, and I had a very short visit. I wasn't allowed to take too many photos because they didn't want the faces to be seen, but they're trying to reintegrate child soldiers. After the genocide, there was a huge amount of Hutus that took refuge in the Congo, mainly into camps there. A lot of the perpetrators fled with this part of the population, and regrouped and formed militias. If you've been reading much about what's been going on in the Congo, and just recently, just in January, they've actually finally at least stopped this one big militia that, their purpose was to regroup and come back. Children can get in and out. They're innocent looking. They can go and steal, and they're easy to get to participate into all sorts of horrendous violent acts. And so there's this population of Rwandans living in Congo. Now, most of those 2 million that fled initially have come back, but the ones that have stayed a lot of them are the ones that are either wanting to restart the war, or they're just so afraid to come back that they're going to be killed. They don't want to come back. And the Rwandan government has been doing what they can to at least get the children back. And they're able to, prior to this past January, they were able to coax and encourage some of the children to flee, and then they bring them into these reintegration camps. They're giving them all sorts of therapy. And I was really surprised. Very, very progressive. They're doing a lot of art therapy with them. They're doing a lot of counseling with them. They're doing a lot of group stuff with them, and the idea is you're helping to bring these kids back from being killers to being kids again. This is the bunkhouse where they stay. This was a really great example when the kids first come in and they're doing art. It's all about armies and soldiering and killing, and after they've been there for a few months, they start to become kids again and start to do drawings and start to reflect more normal child behavior. That white woman there is Victoria Trabash. She's the person who got me involved in Rwanda. She's an executive business coach, and this is a great story of how one person can make a huge difference, and it's inspired me, and I hope it can inspire all of you, because it's so easy to look at all of the stuff going on in our world and saying, I'm never going to be able to change this. Vicki was on a plane home from New York about 6 years ago. She's sitting next to someone from Amnesty International. They had strike up this conversation, and they start talking about Rwanda, and she was like, well, what do you mean? What happened? And, you know, like a lot of people, we have busy lives, and she was not that up on what was going on around the world, and she missed it. And she was so stunned that she had gone through, you know, this period of time and not known what had happened in Rwanda. She just felt this calling that she had to do something, and she started a nonprofit organization called Itafari. Itafari is the Kenya-Rwandan word for brick, and the idea is to rebuild Rwanda brick by brick. And I met Vicki at a conference where she was speaking about her coaching, which is her main occupation, and we exchanged business cards, and I started using her as a coach, and she started using me to photograph her fundraisers, and that's how I got involved with this work. Itafari now has a sponsorship program where they have 200 children, orphans, that people like you and me are sponsoring for $25 a month. I have a child that I sponsor, and I got to meet him when I went there in January, and it was just so cool, you know, and to know that, you know, the people that are sponsors are making such a big difference in someone's lives. So Vicki started that program through Itafari. They do some microfinance. They have a program, and I'll show you this, that with a partner organization in Rwanda where they're doing cooperatives of child-headed households and orphans, and they're giving them goats to start goat rearing, and the idea is that they'll start their own business and then they'll be able to take care of themselves, and I'll go on touch on that later. But here's one person, didn't know anything about it, and now we're raising $200,000 to $300,000 a year, and 95% of that is going straight back to Rwanda, and it's making incredible difference in terms of the help. And if you ever feel like this world is overwhelming and you can't make a difference, I would say you're wrong. I'd say we all have the opportunity to make huge differences, and this is just one story, and I think about this. This kid is 9 years old. Just blown away, you know, hearing the stories and talking to the people that are running this camp, you know, and they're saying these kids are raping, they're murdering, they're stealing, they're killing, you know, they're on drugs. It's one of the ways they keep the child soldiers amped up, and their kids, they feel like they're invincible. And I'm listening to this and I'm thinking, okay, I've got a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old. And to think that a child could be forced to do this, and it goes on throughout the world. There's a great story about the child soldier from Sierra Leone. Is anybody trying to remember the name of that book? Now, there's a number of them, but they're being helped and they're being reintegrated. And part of what the program is also doing is it goes back to the communities before the kids are sent back, and they're working with the people in the communities on how to accept them back into the communities and to not be afraid to have them back in the communities, that, you know, and involve the people in the rehabilitation process after they come out of this little education center. And they ended this as kind of a traditional Rwandan dance that they did for us. We spent about 2 hours there. I'm trying to work something out so my next trip I would love to spend a couple days and really get to know them and talk to them some more and really document what they're doing. Assist Rwanda is a group that was started by Emmanuel Shema Kokora. He is now one of my very good friends. When I went back in January, I stayed with him in his house. Everywhere Emmanuel goes, this is him right here. He is always attracting kids to him. We were at a spot where the kids were surrounding me. He's like, "Hey kids, come on over here," and he's entertaining them. And I got a nice photo of him with the kids. But what Assist Rwanda does is they're completely focused on youth. The whole idea behind it is that to take orphan and vulnerable youth, street kids, and give them some minimal training and set them up with a business. Set them up in cooperatives and businesses. So he's setting up cooperatives that are goat rearing cooperatives. They're cooperatives that are carpentry cooperatives. They're welding cooperatives. They're sewing cooperatives. And he's transforming literally the lives of these children. Children that, are wearing rags for clothes that are falling off their bodies. And now they have a little bit of training. They've got some mentors. And within the course of a year and a half of starting to work with Assist, they have their own businesses. And now they're role models for the community. They're making 2-3 times the national average, which is $1.25 a day. And I think it's just such an amazing story. When I got to Emmanuel's house, the day I flew in, he's got all his brothers and uncles staying at his house, and he's taking care of them and making sure that they're going off to school and getting their needs met. And I'm finding out later on that, we tease Emmanuel that he runs a youth hostel because he always has kids. He's got 2 kids that he's adopted. He's getting married and he's planning on starting a family of his own, and yet he's the eldest brother in his family, and he's taking care of all of his brothers and sisters. Second day I was there in January, I went off with him to the northern part of the country. This is a group of kids that have gone through a year of mentoring. They are literally having the meeting where they're establishing their businesses. And they're talking, unbeknownst to me, each of these people that I work with Assist get up and talk, and then Emmanuel says, "Okay, now Adam wants to say something to you." So, here I was put on the spot, but it was, so cool to see that, to think, okay, I was there when these kids started their businesses. And literally that's what they did. They met all together, and then they went outside and they got into their groups, and they talked about, and each group had a mentor, and they talked about how they were going to, set up sort of the charter for their businesses. And the next day, although they've been doing it a little bit anyhow, but literally the next day they have their businesses were being formalized that very day. And then, the next day we went out and we saw some of these kids. This is one of the sewing cooperatives. They've been supplied. Now this cooperative is a little more resource funded because they're not sharing 2 machines that some of the cooperatives are. They've got a set of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 machines. A lot of them are sharing back and forth. Once they have the cooperative set up, they now qualify to do some microfinancing, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And they're going to be set for their lives in terms of being able to support themselves, to support their families, to be role models, to bring other children out of poverty. This is the carpentry cooperative, and literally it's like the back of a house, and there these guys are out, and I shouldn't say there are no power tools. There are very few power tools. They're sawing boards, they're planing them, and they're making cabinets, and they're making tables, and they're making bookcases. And these are going into the houses of the local people. The idea is also they're helping Rwanda becoming self-sustaining, so they don't have to rely on the foreign aid, and they don't have to rely on food being brought in. The whole program of the government right now, they've got this Vision 2020 that by the year 2020 the country will be self-sufficient and will be able to take care of itself and then become an exporter of their products and services that they're producing. This is welding. I thought this was so very typical of what you see. When you have something electronic, and you have electricity to plug it into. There's no cord, there's no sockets and cords. There's like these long scraggly cords with bare wires at the ends of them, and when it was time to switch from the sander to the welder, there's this clump of wires, and he takes the two raw ends and he just puts one there, and your tool's powered up and ready to go. The other big program Assist is doing is these goat cooperatives, and the idea is it's not just goat cooperatives, but it's a whole breeding program. The goat meat is eaten by people that can afford it in Rwanda. It's also a very high demand item in the Middle East, and the idea is that they'll build up the herds to the point where they can be exporting meat to the Middle East. They're taking Rwandan nanny goats and they're crossbreeding them with South African boar goats to make a bigger, meatier goat. They built the pens. This pen that this is a farm area where they're starting the initial program up before they're distributing the goats to the cooperatives. So cool. The first I went there like 3 different times. First time I was there was just the structure with no mud, and then they're literally just digging the mud out of the ground and slapping it in and making the sides. And when I came back 2 years or a year later, it was filled with goats. These are the South African boar goats. Another part of Itafari's program is for $25. You can buy a goat and get a little certificate and give it so this year, instead of giving crap to all my nieces and nephews, they all got goats. They got a certificate saying, a goat was purchased in your name to help out a child in Rwanda, and it's this pretty little certificate. And I had this sort of hesitation, are my nephews going to hate me because I'm giving them? I was astounded. There's a 15-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old, and
what's the name of the group again?
Itafari, ITAFARI.org, and that's their website, Itafari Foundation. So here I am, kind of feeling like this, I want to do this and I want to be doing good, but I don't want my nephews to not like me, and I got the most incredible notes back from them this year. It completely blew me away. I've given them toys and puzzles and books and gift cards, for birthdays and holidays before, and sometimes you get a thank you note back, sometimes I don't. This year, I was just blown away. This is the most incredible gift. How thoughtful of you. Wow, a goat. I mean, even kids get it. This is one of the South African boar goats. This is actually one of the little cooperatives. I was hoping to spend a day with the kids in this cooperative. They were all off in school. So they have 6 nanny goats, and the boar goat's already been there. So the boar goat comes in, does his business, and then the people administrating the program bring him out, and then the next mating round, the boar goat will go to a different cooperative. So you're not having interbreeding. And these 6 goats in a couple years will be, 30, 40 goats. And then they'll be able to really start making money and growing their businesses. And with the goat cooperatives in particular, the idea is that it'll be for younger kids. So as the kids get older, that they'll be then able to kind of go off into different sectors of business, and the next younger generation will take over the cooperatives. This is one little baby billy goats and little baby nanny goat. The friendliness of the Rwandan people is so incredible, and coming home from where we were seeing where that big goat pen was, Emmanuel, who was driving, he's like, "Oh, just let me take a second. I want to go visit my mom. She's just down this road." So we literally turned down this road, drove for about 5 minutes, and there's his mom and 2 of his nieces and nephews, and actually that little baby goat was his mom's. It's not part of the goat cooperative program, but goat looks just like one of my cats. It just blew me away. I was like, oh my God. But just, and then they just open you, and that's so common with everyone I've come across while I've been in Rwanda, is this openness and this welcoming and this we're all family kind of attitude and feeling. And you see a lot of people with kids, and you find out they're not their kids. They're kids that were orphaned. They're kids that were kids of some of the perpetrators, and here's survivors raising them because these people are off in jail. Everybody makes sure that they take care of everybody else as best they can, and it happens and it works. And to me, I think it's a part of culture that we are really lacking, and I find a lot of inspiration when I see this and am allowed to be a part of it. So kind of typical structures. This is this sort of open wood structure is where they'll store grain at different times of the season when they have excess, getting ready to plant or just after they've harvested. And then pretty common mud-walled structures. This is mud floor. Animals are not domesticated. You don't get to go touch and pet the dogs. They bark and growl at you. And when I talk to people about, that I have a dog and comes in the house with me, and they're just like, "What? You let your dog in the house and you're not afraid of it?" And a different way of relating to their animals. I don't see very many cats there. And then after we saw Emmanuel's mom, we went 3 doors down. "Oh, I got to introduce you. She's my favorite aunt." And I love that about the people. And again, everywhere you go, you see that. Microfinance is really, it's changing the way things change. How do I say this right? It's making a huge change in poverty in the third world and throughout the globe, where the old models of, well, I'm not going to lend you money unless you have a job, unless you have collateral, and unless I know you can pay it back, you don't have a chance of getting a loan here in the United States. Well, these people don't have anything. And this whole model of microfinance, it's pretty new within the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, where people are given loans on the quality of their character and the ideas that they have and their motivations, and they're given these small loans, $30, $60, $100. They're paid back within a year. And what they found is that the rate of repayment on these loans exceeds anything that happens in the West. These people, they get a loan for a typewriter. So this guy now has a business. There's a demand for, there's times when you need documents typed up. There aren't typewriters. So he gets a loan, he gets a typewriter, and now he's in business for himself. Someone gets a sewing machine. She has her own business now. She can take care of her family. She pays it back, and now if she wants another loan, now she has established herself, and she can qualify for a little bit bigger of a loan. This was gentleman. He was on his 3rd round of a loan, so he was able to borrow a little bit more. So he built this little house here, and he also built a little enclosure to keep his cows. It's just, it's astounding. It's astounding to me that someone had this vision of saying, wow, here's someone who has nothing, and hey, there's a bank customer for me. Imagine that. That even idea happened, and it's been incredibly successful. Most of the loans go to women because they're the responsible ones. Men get a loan and they drink it and squander it. The women make sure that they take care of their family. So I don't remember the exact percentage, but I believe it's in like the 90% of the loans go out to women. This is a new microfinance bank that's just being started up in Rwanda. It's called Kojad. They're building branches in all of the really little teeny communities that don't have electricity. They don't have, not only do, the houses don't have electricity, but a lot of even the businesses in the communities don't have electricity. This woman, and we went around, this is kind of a next higher level of microfinance. She's borrowing a few $100s. She's got an established business, an air compressor for a mechanic shop that she runs and owns. They kept telling me they were going to go to a saloon to show me some microfinance stuff. And saloon, and we arrive at this place and they're cutting hair. I'm like, a salon, you know, they call it a saloon. I know. I'm thinking I'm going to walk into a bar with my cameras, and we walk in, you know, it's this curtained area, and it says saloon over the top. It's spelled like saloon, and, you know, so he borrowed some stuff to put in some little workstations so they can, you know, cut people's hair. Havana Saloon. This one branch of the bank is in an area, and this is a spot. There's no electricity. There's a safe in the middle of the floor in one of the rooms, and there's just a guard that's there that when the bank's not open, and nothing gets taken. Before I went on my second trip, this is at this point about a year ago, I clipped a little article out of the New York Times about this hospital that's being built in northern Rwanda to fight infectious disease, and they're using all local means to build it. We got out there, and I told Emmanuel, I said, Emmanuel, I want to go to this hospital. He says, oh, great, we're going to be close to there 3 days from now. And I'm thinking, well, you know, hospital, it's got to be, you know, not too long of a drive. Well, we turned off the main road, and it took us 2 hours to get there in our car, winding dirt roads. And one of the issues with infectious disease is, and it's mainly around tuberculosis, is that you can have some gastrointestinal problem, or you can break your leg. This is just the road going out there, or you can be a dumb kid riding on the back of a truck and fall off and hurt yourself. Had to throw this in. I just thought this was so great. And you go into the hospital for your broken leg, and there's a TB patient that's 2 doors down, and there's a common hallway, and maybe you pass each other once or twice in the 3 days you're there, and they mend your leg or fix your bellyache with some antibiotics. But you go home and you've got TB and you don't even know it, and you spread it to your family because it's highly contagious, highly infectious disease. And so there's this problem of how can you don't have any modern means of controlling infection like you do in the West. So if you had TB here or some other really contagious disease, you would go in a special unit that would have a negative air evacuation system. It's basically vacuum pumps always sucking the air out. So all the germs that you're coughing up, are getting sucked out of the room and out of the hospital and dissipated. You can't do that in an area like this. You don't even have the electricity, let alone the machinery. This is the old hospital. So it's like, so the question is, well, what do you do, and how can you fight infectious disease? And they've really become incredibly innovative. And they said, well, instead of having a hospital with a central corridor with rooms off the side, we'll build a new hospital for these patients, and it's going to be completely open, and all the beds are going to be in the middle. And we're going to site it on a hilltop where there's stronger breezes. And we'll build the roof 2 stories high with permanent openings, so air will be always coming in and out. And so they're designing and building this hospital that's going to have air exchange rates equal to what they have in the West. It's been done a couple times before, and they're able to contain the infections as well as they can using modern technology, but doing it within the social means that are available there. Little did I know they were just starting the hospital. This is what it's going to look like when it's done. The other thing they're doing is if you have to go to occupational therapy or x-rays or get blood drawn, you're not going to be walking through any kind of corridor. You have to go outside and go in a separate door. So any chance that I might have, if I'm there with my broken leg or a bad lung infection, or that's treatable. Any chance that I have of passing you, it's going to be out in the open, and the chances of the disease getting into my body are going to be pretty much zero. They were just starting to build the hospital. The hospital and how it's being built to fight the disease is, innovative and fascinating in its own right, but how they're building it, to me, was just a complete surprise story, because they're, again, all local means for building it. There are no earth-moving machines or trucks or equipment anywhere on site. The 1 or 2 trucks I saw were bringing in loads of raw materials, rocks, basically, and just dumping them in a pile that they need to use in the building construction. They need to get them onto site from somewhere. Everything's being done by hand. So now you're employing local people that are subsisting, people that don't have jobs, and you're giving them a job. They're making above the national wage, and they're learning a craft. So a hospital now becomes a complete poverty reduction program, all in and of itself. Everything's done by hand. The dirt's dug up, it's put in these little containers, goes on your head, you carry, and these are heavy. I lifted one of these. If that was on my head, I would have been crumpled on the ground. And here are these, they go to the side of the hill and they dump it. Come back, get their next load. The other thing that's happening is that these people are working in shifts. They come on and they work for a week. They go back to their village. A whole new crew comes in, works for a week, goes back to their village. There's 6 shifts. So now not only am I employing a set of people to build the hospital, I'm employing 6 times as many people and spreading that wealth around to as many people in the surrounding area as I possibly can. All of the carpentry, all of the woodwork is being built on site. There will not be any moldings, there will not be any cabinets, any desks that are brought in. It's all being built there. You're teaching people how to build things. You're teaching them carpentry skills. All of the bricks are being made on site. Cinder blocks. They're not trucking them in. They're just making them right there. So they are employing as many people as they can, and they are, lifting these people out of the lower levels of the poverty conditions that they're in. Another innovative area, this is one of the Millennium Villages. The UN in, I can't remember when the conference was, it was 2000, 2001. Global leaders from around the world met, and they were discussing how can we lift the bottom of the world out of poverty, and they came up with these set of Millennium Development Goals, and they established these sort of test villages mostly in sub-Saharan Africa, and one of them is in Rwanda. They picked areas that were just the poorest areas, and to see, can we bring these villages out of poverty? Can we teach them and give them the means to support themselves? So this is one of the Millennium Villages. It's in Mayanja. It's about 40 minutes south of Kigali. It's one of the areas of Rwanda that is dry. They built cisterns in between the houses, so anytime it rains, the water runs off the roof, it goes through a gutter system, it goes through a pipe, and it fills the cistern. They're, in terms of the farming, again, very dry. They've introduced crops that do well in those conditions. It's farmers growing cassava. It's very high nutritional value for the amount of plant that you're growing. So they're growing cassavas. They're doing grafting, where they're taking local rootstock that can live in these dry, somewhat depleted soils, and then they're grafting. And here's the graft point, this little niche right here. They're grafting avocado and mango and pomegranate, and so now you're able to, in 2 years, have fruit-bearing trees. Everything gets carried out on hand. They have a nursery on site where they're making starter plants and then distributing them throughout the village. They have a grain bank so you have your harvest and you've got more grain than you can use. They're literally, you put it in a grain bank on site, and then when you need it, you can go and take it out. And that's what was happening here. There were people coming and they were taking grain out. If you don't have any grain, you get, basically like a loan. So you get a slip of paper saying, you took out 3 whatever bushels of grain, and that when you have your next harvest that you'll pay it back. Really amazing what they're doing, and they've been able to build some new schools now. They're being able to bring down the class sizes a little bit. They're starting to bring some technology in. The people are living much better than they were 8 years ago before this village was established as a quote-unquote millennium village. This is one of the schools we visited, and you can't see it, but they're planting trees all along the sides here to provide shade for the hotter days. Same kind of cistern system that they use in the houses. This is a big cistern, so when it rains, water collects here, and then there's the pipes where you can get it out. They're doing some micro businesses in the schools. So if you're a school kid, you got to get your hair cut. It's a 3-hour walk into town. It costs, I don't remember the conversion. It costs like $1. Let's say, I don't remember the numbers, but it costs X amount to get your hair cut in town, and then you have to walk back. Well, now they're having people starting little businesses doing hair cutting right on the school property. No time involved in terms of getting there and back. The haircut is half as much, and this guy's got a business cutting hair on property. They've got a health clinic that they put in. They actually have health insurance. They pay in a minimal amount, and if they get sick, they can go see a doctor. In some respects, their health insurance, at least in this site, is a little bit better than what a lot of people here have. One of the things that was interesting to me, we're talking with this doctor, well, what are the most common things that you see? And I'm expecting him to say HIV/AIDS, and I'm expecting to hear him say tuberculosis, and I'm expecting to hear him talk about, malaria and sleeping sickness and, all the exotic kind of things that we associated with kind of these major diseases. And he says, upper respiratory element, number 1 killer and number 1 disease. They get sick and there's no antibiotics to treat them. Gastrointestinal problems, number 2. Malaria, number 3. Interesting, to me, it was surprising. It was very different than what my stereotype was of what I think is going on. We saw the maternity ward. This was a little baby that was just leaving. Actually, the people in the maternity ward didn't want their photos taken, so I had to accept that and not take any photos. The unique charge of this Millennium Village that's different from all the other ones is bringing survivors and perpetrators together and doing work on reconciliation. This was kind of a more formal tour that we took, and we spent a day there, and at the end, all the people in the village gathered, and they had a little feast for us, and we heard a survivor and a perpetrator get up and speak to us and talk about their experience during the genocide. So this woman went first, and she told us about her family getting wiped out, her children, her husband, all of her immediate family except for one uncle. Now she's starting a new family. And then this gentleman got up and he said, I was at one of the roadblocks, and I was responsible for killing 9 people in this area, and talked about his experience and how he felt about it now, and the fear that he lives under. It was interesting. He's the one living under more fear than the survivors, because they feel like there's going to be, someone's going to come and kill them because of what they did. These people are building their houses together. they're going to church together. Yeah, just 2 seconds. So just another just big part of the whole story of all of the things that are going on there. And I will just leave you with that. So thank you very much.